Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Technology and Great Power Competition, sponsored by Palantir on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Colonel Jennifer Krolikowski, the Senior Material Leader for Space Command and Control at the Space Systems Command. Now, Colonel, before break, we were talking about kind of the way you've set up the acquisition approach for C2, the three pillars, and we were talking about the color of money. And you and I could, I think, talk so much more about the color of money and the challenges that brings. But I'm going to maybe move us forward, because one of the things that is really important that you all are doing is looking at the industrial base and saying, okay, how can we bring in some of those folks who are different, maybe non-traditional contractors, but also work with traditional contractors? Let's start there about how you're trying to find that right balance, how you're trying to attract folks who maybe say, I've never worked with DoD or the federal government before. How are you trying to bring them into the fold?
No, for sure. And that's also part of the culture that we also explore here within Kobayashi Maru, and kind of goes into that whole build versus buy kind of discussion set as well. So yes, we are very welcoming of what we would call those non-traditional companies that would tend to work that don't tend to work with defense, but also have a lot to offer from the market that they capture on the commercial side. So one of the things that we also recognize here at KM, like, I am never going to be able to invent like the next IT or the next software that's going to compete with what industry is already developed or what they're already pushing on. People like Google and Netflix and Amazon and all of those things, from like how you do, cloud native building and containerized workflows and, all of that sort of stuff. Like, me as the government, like, industry is already surpassing us from the government. So I should use that, right? I should like bring that in and embrace, the things that tech or the commercial world can accelerate me on for the elements of the architecture that I need for. So, for example, in a typical software tech stack, if you will, you have the hosting environment, which we use the cloud as much as possible. The platform, so think of that as like your operating system that you have on your computer or on your cell phone or something like that. And then you have all your applications on top. We actually inject another layer in there that we call data as a service, because we're so intensive with respect to data and the processing that we need to have with that. We recognized really early on that we needed kind of an enterprise offering for all of our applications to be able to keep data authoritative, have the cleansing, curating, ontology, knowledge mapping, all of that sort of stuff in there. So we actually inject another layer from our architecture. So in traditional acquisition, you would hire one defense prime that would do that whole entire stack. And where they may be good at in the domain for like an application perspective, maybe not as accelerated as, say VMware is on platform, or as Palantir is for, data layer sort of work in that respect. And so by us breaking that stack apart and actually getting best of breed in each of those areas, we're able to take in that stuff from industry that is, awesome and helps accelerate, the stack of it in general. So case in point, we have, again, our data layer. We built that into our architecture. But because we had that infrastructure there and we were doing it for Space Command and Control, we realized that we had other partners that needed to take advantage of it. They wanted to take advantage of what we were doing with data as well. And knowing that we had that commercial capability, they came in to see how we could leverage. So we teamed with NORAD Northcom, and we also teamed with the Department of the Air Force level, ingested data sets that they needed and wanted as well. And we're able to kind of get a sight picture of Air Force readiness and then Space Force readiness, and how did that translate to Homeland Defense, and so information that people never were able to see before, we were able to actually enable, because we needed this for Space C2 being such a data intensive system. And then further from that, we were able to actually help with the Afghan airlift because we were able to pull in information from our infrastructure with what the Army was doing and with what IC was doing, the intel community, bring all of that together, and we were then able to maximize how we can get aircraft and personnel and equipment and everything that we needed for the airlift that happened about a month or so ago. All of that success then has also led us to, what can we do to expand that across the Space Force and help that enablement, there to extend. So much so that we're actually setting up a cross-mission data division within the directorate that I work in to focus specifically on those data questions and issues. But all of that stems back to, industry can help us with that. They're leading cutting edge on that type of data work. And so it just makes sense to me, at least, to bring in those best of breeds and buy it at this point. Because even if we tried to build it, which there could be some value in it, industry has it today. And it may make sense for us as the government to build it, to have maybe some of that ownership, but I don't have time to wait 5-10 years before the government may be able to build it. And by then industry, would have progressed that much further too. So there is a balance there, but we're trying to build where it makes sense, and then buy definitely where it makes sense too, and bring all of those things together to integrate it into my ecosystem so that I get the best of all worlds, depending on what part of my architecture I'm looking at.
Thank you for breaking down kind of the way you approach the different pieces and parts to this cloud, this DevSecOps approach, if you will, or agile approach. The one thing that came to mind as you went through it is, so are you playing the role of systems integrator? Are you playing the role of lead systems integrator for this? Because if you're pulling vendor X for the data layer, vendor Y for the cloud layer, and vendor Z for a different layer, someone's got to make sure that the layers play nicely together. There's interoperability. And what if you buy vendor X, but vendor X and vendor Y, they need some middleware, and that adds a challenge. So is that the role you and Kobayashi Maru are playing?
So ultimately, yes. But as to your point, like as you're describing it, that is rather complex. And we can hire an integrator to do that, but we're also seeing which company has that skill sets, which I would love to be able to explore that a little bit more of, because there could be some great integration between application and platform, but there's a different integration between data and hosting environment, let's say. So there's the government right now, we firmly believe in government-led development, so that we take an active role, not a passive role with the companies that we work and the contractors that we have, so that we actually are teaming with them. There's a relationship there in the way that we're building. Again, I want to avoid things of throwing over the fence. So like I mentioned earlier, I don't want requirements thrown over the fence to me, and I hope I understand them. I want to work and build that relationship there. Same thing with acquisition. I don't want to just throw a contract over the fence and hope something came back. I have to have that active interaction with the contracting team, with the contractors that I have, in order to be able to guide and shape that build. So the other piece of it, and I know this is something that is a little bit of a shift as well. A lot of people want to spend 2 years designing a system and take that time, almost like a strategic pause and think about that. Well, one, I don't always have 2 years. And then two, who's to say I was right, in that design, especially given what I think of today versus how life has changed 2 years from now. Is that design still appropriate? So what we try and do then as a mindset shift is, okay, I know the vision here. I know where, I'm always going to have to do space domain awareness and battle management, command and control, but the details under there change and evolve over time. So I need to be able to have my design grow and flex with me in that way too. And so when I identify something has to integrate, I do that. I hesitate to say it's in real time because we're a little bit more deliberate than that, but I didn't do a design, a whole thing of like, where's all my integration points, and hope I got that part right. Or maybe I project, in the old way of design, I might've projected integration points that I didn't even need. And so did I raise resources there versus going after where I did need to integrate? So there's a bit of a shift on how the build happens. And I know that I'm an engineer myself. So I know that can be a little daunting for some people who want to, lay it all flat right from the start. But I think that's one of the biggest things that we offer here in KM is that flexibility and that evolution that can happen. So we're not static. When we build something, we actually think about the dynamic evolution and make sure that all elements of our architecture can accommodate that, so we can take on any requirement changes or priority changes or threat changes that are in there without having to go back and build a whole nother new system because of that.
The other piece that comes to mind as you go through this is the vendor lock-in challenge. And there's always a concern about, well, are we wedded to a single vendor because they're so integrated into the stack? Is that because part of what you all are doing is saying, okay, that's a traditional contractor. Oh, there's a non-traditional one that has a cool new feature that we want to add to it. Well, do they integrate with this other vendor? How do you ensure that you're not getting kind of locked into one set of capabilities or one set of type of architecture?
No, and that's because I get that question, obviously quite often. And so there's actually like two folds to that. One is shift into a mentality that software or that tech or whatever is disposable. I'm not wedded to that forever. And that's a definite shift, I think, for the government. They're used to like, oh, you delivered me something, now I get to keep it for 20, 50 years. And really in software, like you can't, like if I have it for more than 3 to 5 years, I'm obsolete, right? So I need to have that mindset of it being disposable. And if there's a company that can do, this piece of the tech better, faster, cheaper, then great, let's bring you in and we'll pop out, the other piece. And that could be a government built piece too, right? So it's not just like I'm going from vendors to vendors per se. But where I look at who can accelerate me, who can optimize my ecosystem at that given time, and let's bring that in, pop out the old stuff, and then shift that way.
Give me a sense. What's the one? I'm going to ask you just for one because we're just about out of time. What's the one big lesson you've learned from this effort over the last 2.5, 3 years?
So the biggest thing is the education challenge, if you will, to trying to describe and bring people on board with the mindset and the mentality and the way that we execute. So there's probably better ways I could have done to express like a lot of the concepts that we shared here today, especially to some of our external stakeholders, whether that be in the Pentagon or in Space Force headquarters or my users or any of that. There's a lot of education in here to go from the industrial age way that we've built things, and then shifting it to this other mindset that is more agile and different kinds of concepts. And it does make people feel uneasy with the change, and I get that. I'm here to help facilitate and guide that that journey together. But most of my job is actually a people problem, not a tech problem.
We've heard that many times over the last 25 years. It's never the technology, it's always the people. And it sounds like you were going down a pretty good path to solve both of them. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, so let me thank my guest. Colonel Jennifer Krolikowski is the Senior Material Leader for Space Command and Control at the Space Systems Command. Colonel Krolikowski, great to have you on.
Thank you so much, and appreciate being able to chat today.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion, Technology and Great Power Competition, sponsored by Palantir on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Palantir.